Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Pico, and needless to say, I was so really touched when I heard that anybody from the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta would have any interest in listening to me on any subject under the sun. And I'm really honored if you're interested in discussing my ancient book, The Lady and the Monk, in your book club this April. I've got to confess that 37 years after I wrote it, much of me cringes when I think of that book. I was barely out of my 30s when I wrote it. I think I was extremely immature, judgmental, know it all, unfair, and writing it and responding to Japan much too quickly. But the other half of me is really grateful that I did record my discovery of a country, a person, and a lifestyle that I hope will be mine forever. I stumbled into Japan, as you read, and stumbled into everything more or less backwards. But I'm so glad now that I do have empirical evidence of everything that passed then based on my fairly compendious notes I took then and there at the time, because otherwise I might have forgotten it, and otherwise I might not believe that some of it had actually happened. Some of you will likely know that just as I was completing the book, my family home in the hills of California burnt to the ground, and I lost everything in the world, including my next three books, which were all in handwritten notes. And essentially, I would say I lost many of my boyhood dreams of being a writer because they all went up in flames. My next 8 years of writing were destroyed. But by good fortune, the working manuscript of The Lady and the Monk was in my shoulder bag when I fled the burning house, and was, of course, a very good guide to impermanence. And the very night our house burnt down, I wrote an article for Time magazine where I was a columnist in those long ago days and was able to quote from a Japanese poem that I'd picked up while living in Kyoto about from Masahide in the 17th century, saying, "My house burnt down. I can now see better the rising moon." Soon after the book came out, people didn't know exactly what to make of it. And because I made a rookie mistake of giving fictional names to real people, many people assumed it was fiction and that I and my wife to be didn't exist. But we do. And although it was often placed in the fiction section of a bookshop, it's very much non-fiction, and I really tried to stay close to every detail of what really happened in that year between late September 1987 and December 1988. Quite a few people wanted to make a movie of it, and we foresaw the possibility of Denzel Washington romancing Anna Sawai or some such. But happily, I think that didn't happen. And although it's an old book, and to me a very, very young book, it does seem to have struck a chord with some readers. And in pre internet days, whenever I was traveling around and talking about Tibet or globalism or the Cuban Revolution or Islamic mysticism or other things that I've written about, almost always at the end of a talk, a hand would go up and somebody would say, "Please, can you tell us what happened to Sachiko? What happened to the woman at the end of The Lady and the Monk?" And I always had to explain that in real life I was a little less clueless than the character Pico that I present on the pages, and of course never left Japan and never left Sachiko. And now I'm sitting in the tiny room in our two-room apartment that we have shared for 32 years. When I left New York City and my midtown 25th floor office and my apartment on Park Avenue to live in a single room in the back streets of Kyoto, I didn't understand what a monastery in Japan really was like. And as you read, I had to work through my many romances and didn't last in the monastery long. But all these 37 and a half years later, I know that the intuition that brought me here wasn't wrong. And really, my wife and I, once known as Sachiko, but in real life Hiroko, lead a pretty monastic life. I've never used a cell phone. We don't have a car here. We only have two rooms, although it used to be population four, with me sleeping on a couch next to the TV, not to my stepchildren's delight. Um, the place is so cramped we can't even open the bathroom door fully. And to this day, our rent is just 500 US dollars a month. So we essentially live a simple life, almost as students. And it feels like the most luxurious life imaginable. So, whatever I was seeking when I came to Japan, I found, in albeit in unexpected ways. And left to my own devices, I would never leave Japan. Any of you who've been here knows that it's a place of kindness, selflessness, and calm to a rare degree. And I feel very spoilt to be here, even though I choose for most of these 37 years to live here on a tourist visa. So I've never been a grown up in Japan, but I'm an endlessly pampered and fascinated visitor and foreigner and tourist here. So, having written a record of my first year in Japan, and of course the excitement of falling in love with a person and a city and a culture that I had never known before, I thought I should write a sequel of sorts called Autumn Light about my 31st year in Japan. And all of you, I'm sure, know from your own lives it's relatively easy to fall in love, and the challenge in life is to stay in love and to make a marriage as exciting as a honeymoon, and to make a lifelong relationship as fulfilling as the stages of infatuation might be with a person, but also with a way of being and with a culture. And so I saw the Autumn Light book as very much a sequel to the springtime romance of the lady and the monk, and equally about finding a sense of contentment amidst a sense of surprise. Most of you will probably know that Japan is very much based around the seasons. And every autumn, when the skies blaze cloudlessly blue and the parks turn into this festival of golds and scarlets and oranges as the leaves change, most of my neighbors will put on their Sunday best and head out into the temple gardens and parks, much as people in the West traditionally would have gone to church. In other words, to be joined in a congregation, to be reminded of forces much larger than they are, and to be instructed in the laws of changelessness and change. And of course, one of the beauties of autumn is that it has graces that spring might envy. I don't think life goes downhill between the ages of 30 and 60, say. And autumn has the advantage over spring that it knows that spring will end, but also it knows that spring will come again. And of course, as autumn leads the way into winter, it's leading towards the first day of spring. Soon after I arrived in Japan, I heard this probably Buddhist maxim that life is about joyful participation in a world of sorrows.